Our feature movie today was so influential, it moved President Reagan to make a presidential directive and moved Congress to pass federal law. That story and more next on Retroflix. Hi, welcome to Retroflix, your channel for retrospectives on movies and television. Today we have a real treat. This is a movie that actually and I'm taping here, this is May 30th, Tuesday, May 30th. On June 3rd, which will be this Saturday, will be the 40th anniversary of its release in the theaters. Their first day in the theaters was June 3rd, 1983. So this is going to be the 40th anniversary. And back in 1983 too, we were in a time period where the Cold War between the United States and the Soviet Union had intensified. It intensified really going into the 80s. And so this movie made people think, wow. And when I say people, I'm talking about citizens, but also, fortunately, the U.S. government as well, saying, well, we can't let this happen. This actually can happen, and it can happen at any time. Our feature movie today, without further ado, is WarGames, the 1983 movie directed by John Badham. And this movie was written by Walter Parkes and Lawrence Lasker. Parkes and Lasker really started the script of this with an idea in mind of having a dying scientist and a child prodigy. And this child prodigy would be the only person that could understand him and would be able to pass his message. But the child prodigy also, too, is probably too smart for his own good. And that's what they really thought of whenever they were starting the script of this movie. And as a matter of fact, it was called The Genius. But as they got into, and this was started in 1979, as they got into the 80s, and they talked to a gentleman at the Stanford Research Institute who actually was really young at the time, and he talked to him and saw this subculture of hackers, these young people that are really into computers at the time. And computers at that time too were just really coming into the homes. They were around the businesses, but they were really just coming into the homes and being accessible to people and being able to put in their homes. And so after talking to this guy, they thought, you know what, maybe we should take this a different way. Maybe we ought to look at some young teenage computer genius and how he could hack into, the military, for instance. And so that trip to the Stanford Research Institute really brought all that together. It's like computers and video games and the military and all of that together. And so that's their direction of their movie started to go from there. And that's where they started into the script of what we would know of the movie WarGames. Basically, this movie then would be a teenager. This is set in Seattle. This teenager, and he's an underachiever, very intelligent, but didn't really do well in school. But his whole life really was, he would go to school, get it over with, and come home and be in his room with his computer. And he'd have the whole setup, the whole 9 yards, with, at the time, your computer, your floppy disk, your modem, printer. He'd have the whole 9 yards there. But he was so adept at using a computer. So he would thumb through magazines, and he found this magazine that had this company called Protovision. Protovision was coming out with these new video games. So he thought, well, if I can go and find their computers at their company, I could play these games before they even come out. So he got into his modem and started dialing phone numbers all around. And it was in Sunnyvale, California, dialing all the phone numbers that would be there to try to hit their computers. And that's going to be something that's going to be very influential in this movie, because it's going to start a computer term. And we'll talk about that later. But he started to dial all that, and he finally found one that didn't identify itself and figured that's what was it. And so he ended up trying to find a back door because he couldn't get in. And then when he got in, he listed games. and it showed all the games. And there were some that were very, very good. And then all of a sudden you got down the bottom and there were a lot of military, and one was basically a global thermonuclear war. But, it shocked him, at first, but then he was just like, well, this is just, these must be the games. So we play them for fun. But unfortunately, it was the military. So, he's for fun. They think there's something going on, like they're being attacked by the Soviets. So you have that conflict. And I'm going to stop there just in case anybody out there hasn't seen this movie and they want to see it. I'm going to stop there. But in a nutshell, that's what it is. In fact, on the movie poster, it says, is this a game or is it real? Is it a game? Is this a game or is it real? Very profound. The Lasker and Parks wanted to make a computer that would be at the military base. That is basically what, and this TH character's name is David Lightman, he would break into. And so it's basically almost one of those big mainframes that they had back in those days. And this computer, though, would run everything. It would take care, it would run everything, even the launch codes to launch missiles. And this computer would be called the Whopper. And yes, it is named after the hamburger from Burger King because of the sound, the Whopper. It's a Whopper. They thought that would be a great name, but it's actually spelled WOPR because it's an acronym for War Operations Planned Response. Right? And they made this, actually. They made this computer, and there was somebody sitting inside of it with an Apple II computer that then would do the commands that the director wanted and make all the screens in the command center go everywhere. And so that was kind of an interesting thing there. The command center that they had, the military command center, if you see the movie in there, or if you've seen the movie, or if you haven't seen the movie and you will, it was a set that took $1 million. They actually built that, and it took $1 million to build that. Let's look at the casting. The teenager, as we mentioned, in the movie's name was David Lightman. He would be played by Matthew Broderick, and this was only Matthew Broderick's second film. His first film, he just came off of Max Dugan Returns. This is only his second film. He has a female friend that from his high school, he kind of pulls into all this. And her name is, in the movie, is Jennifer Mack. She's played by Ali Sheedy, who goes on to have a pretty successful career in the 80s. Matthew Broderick obviously had a tremendous career. Ali Sheedy had a pretty good career in the 80s herself, but Matthew Broderick, he's obviously he's still today, and I think he does a lot of theater as well. But yeah, but two tremendous actors, no doubt about it. Basically, he's kind of like he worked for the government. He made some of those games that David Lightman finds. And so David Lightman wants to talk to him and see if he could help him out. So there is this element of this older kind of protege, or older type of mentor type of character. And they wanted John Lennon for that role, because they kind of looked at the role as kind of like Stephen Hawking looks like John Lennon. And they approached John Lennon. John Lennon actually was he was really wanting to do that. He was very receptive to doing that role. But unfortunately, during the script writing in December of '81, John Lennon was murdered outside of his apartment in New York City. So they went with a veteran actor named John Wood, who played the Falken character. And then, of course, you had a couple characters that would be in the military, that play in the military base. Dabney Coleman would play Dr. McKittrick, veteran actor there, and Barry Corbin, also veteran actor, would play General Behringer. So this is kind of a little bit of the cast. At the box office, WarGames was very successful. It took in about 80 million domestically and 125 worldwide. This came out in 1983 to the number 5 in the year-end box office sales for this movie. And interestingly enough, this movie was not in as many theaters as almost like the whole top 15 were in more theaters than WarGames was. And some of them were in maybe like 500 or 600 more theaters. And so it makes me wonder just where this movie could have been in the box office sales at the end of the year had they been in more theaters. They wouldn't have they wouldn't have taken over Return of the Jedi, which did about $500 million, but it could have went up, certainly up to number 2 or 3. I think if it was in more theaters. So just an interesting tidbit there, but highly successful at the box office. Highly successful at the box office. The influences of this movie, we talked about them at the beginning. I just talked about a little bit at the beginning. You look at the government response to this. President Reagan was friends with Lasker, actually, one of the writers of this movie, and he watched it. And Reagan was like, he was blown away by it. He almost, in a few months after this, he had a presidential directive that is the first presidential directive to computer security that he made. And also Congress convened and passed a few laws. One in 1984 made it a felony, a computer crime a felony, which this obviously would be. And then in 1986, there was an amendment to that, which at that point said that using an unauthorized computer would be a felony. Which in this situation, David Lightman did. He was tapping into the government's computer unauthorized. That would be now against the law. It's amazing to think about some of these things were actually not back at that time. They did have some computer laws, but laws towards computers, but I think that they were basically in the mail fraud. They didn't have a separate computer crimes though. I mean, that just was not. That was just not a thing. But WarGames made this a thing, and obviously look at the way things are today when it comes to computer security. Also, too, the computer term, war dialing. War dialing came from this movie. Back then, it was called demon dialing, but it changed after this movie to war dialing, and that is what he did in the movie, where he just put his modem on and it just dialed number after number after number to find the computer he was looking for. And so that was called war dialing. And then when somebody drives around and tries to find open Wi-Fi, that's called war driving now. So that's an indirect consequence from the movie, but or indirect influence, I should say, for that. Looking at video games, the ColecoVision, if you remember that, for those of you older to remember ColecoVision, it was basically Atari and television and ColecoVision. It had really good graphics. I think actually it was a really great video game system. I didn't have one, but I played it. They had a video game called WarGames from this movie. And then that got ported to Atari, their 8-bit system, I believe. And then it went to the Commodore 64, which I did have one of those. I had a Commodore 64, the floppy disk, the printer, the whole, although I didn't have a modem. And I don't even remember if they had modems for the Commodore 64. I'm not sure about that, but I didn't have one. But I had a printer, a floppy disk. But I didn't have WarGames for that, though. Interestingly enough, I'm surprised I didn't. The PlayStation had one, had a game, a WarGames. And then in 2012, it's Android and Apple had a game, at least by title anyway, called WarGames. I never played it. I've never seen it. So I don't know. I don't know if the gameplay is based on the movie, but the title is. So that's interesting, and I don't know if that's around or not. But I just found that out. I didn't know about that, and doing some of my research. It's just a phenomenal movie, so influential, and I think it stands the test of time. There's no doubt about it. If you've seen this movie, please comment below and tell me what you think of it. What are your memories of this movie? If you haven't seen this movie, there are plenty of places out there you can get this. For rent, you can go to Prime Video. Also, Vudu has it for rent. And Apple TV. Apple TV has it for rent. if you have a subscription to any of the following, you can see it. You can see it there: Spectrum, and Showtime, Sling, and you'll have to forgive me. I forget the last one. If I remember, I will put the last one down in the information box in my intro box below. I'll put that down there. But for subscription, I know Showtime, Sling, and Spectrum. If you have any of those. I remember now. Paramount Plus. No, if you have a subscription to Paramount Plus, you can watch WarGames there. Yeah, that's it. Okay. So if you go and you do that, if you haven't watched this and you go somewhere and watch one of those and go watch it, please comment below. Tell us what you think of it. And also, too, if there's any other movies that you want to do, please put that down in the comments below, too. Until next time, that's a wrap.